Hello dear viewers, welcome to the Alien Relatives channel. I paid off your mortgage with my own money, so my daughter and her children will also be living here, and you are obliged to cook for them. The mother-in-law, the mother-in-law declared. Today's story is about impudence that knows no bounds, and about how expensive the help of relatives can sometimes be. The door opened with difficulty, bumping into something soft and bulky. Vitalina frowned, pushed the oak panel with her shoulder, and a thick, stuffy smell of fried capelin hit her nose, interrupting the subtle aroma of expensive furniture varnish that soaked her clothes as it booths. In the hallway, usually empty and sterile like an operating room, chaos reigned. Enormous bags were piled up. The sleeve of a child's jacket fell out of the unzipped cheap suitcase. On the Karel and birch bench, Vitalina's pride, which she restored over 3 months, stood a dirty bag from Piara Torotka, from which someone's melted ice cream. Vitalina exhaled slowly. The keys jingled as they fell onto the shelf. She didn't undress, but walked into the living room in her shoes, leaving traces of street dust on the laminate. Sveta was sitting on her sofa, her feet up on the coffee table. Zalavna was clicking the TV remote, and her 2 children, 5-year-old Pashka and 7-year-old Alina, were jumping on a beanbag chair, spilling popcorn all over the place. "Oh, I'm so done." Instead of greeting her, she threw Sveta a greeting, not taking her eyes off the screen where some talk show was playing. "Your remote's stuck. I should change the batteries." Yulia Markovna came weeping out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, Vitalina's linen decorative towel, which was not allowed to be touched. Her mother-in-law looked as if she'd always lived here, in a faded robe with large flowers and worn-out slippers. "Vida, finally!" she boomed, looking her daughter-in-law over with a proprietary air. "We're already hungry. Your fridge is absolutely emptied, of course. Just herbs and a can of paint. Sveta's on her way. The kids are tired. You should run to the store, buy some ground meat and potatoes." Vitalina was silent. She looked at the frost-bitten sitting spot on the bench, visible from the hallway. This wasn't just rudeness. It was an intervention. "What's going on here?" Vitalina's voice was quiet, but Sveta winced and took her feet off the table. Lydia Markovna only smiled wider, revealing a row of gold crowns. "What happened?" "Relatives have arrived. Svetka is in trouble. The out-of-sight of a husband kicked her out." "Where should she go?" "To her mother's 1-room apartment. There's not even room to turn around there. Then you have a 3-room apartment, plenty of room for everyone." "Does Kirel know?" Vitalina asked, feeling the vein in her temple pulsate. "Well, of course. I called him and said, get the guests. He did mumble something about work, but I said, Mother, we don't discuss it." Vitalina took out her phone. 3 missed calls from her husband and 1 message in Messenger. "Sorry, Mom," she said, presenting it as a fait accompli. "I'll be there soon. We'll figure everything out." "Okay, so." Vitalina stepped to the table, snatched the remote from Sveta's hands, and turned off the TV. The children froze. Sveta's mouth dropped open. "You have half an hour to get ready. There are hotels in the city. I'll send you the addresses of some inexpensive hostels now." Lydia Markovna flushed. She put her hands on her hips, instantly transforming from a kind grandmother into a market fury. "Who are you chasing? Who are you chasing out of the house, you little brat? This is my son's apartment. He's the boss here. And you, as long as you wear the ring, should keep quiet, serve his relatives, Zaявila. This apartment," Vitalina said, clearly beating out each word like a metronome. "Yes, it was acquired during the marriage, but the down payment is the sale of my studio. I pay the mortgage from my own account. Kirill hasn't even paid his utilities on time for 3 years. Also, the landlord here is the law and the paperwork." "Hush," she said. Her mother-in-law stepped forward, looming over Vitalina. She was waving papers. "Family is more important than papers. Sveta and the children will live here for as long as necessary, in a small room. You have a workshop there. Anyway, no need, no big mess. Put away your wooden things, we'll put in the beds." Vitalina glanced at the door to her workshop. There, in the small room, a unique 10th century chest of drawers was drying. An order from a very important and very capricious antique dealer. There were expensive varnishes, solvents, and tools lying around, each one costing as much as Lydia Markovna's kidney. "No one will enter this room," Vitalina said, "and no one will stay here overnight." At that moment, the front door lock clicked. Kirill practically stumbled into the apartment. He looked like a beaten dog hunched over. His eyes darted, and he was holding a ridiculous cake in a plastic box. "Mama, my beloved Sveta," he began, looking from one woman to the other. "Why start arguing so suddenly? Let's have some tea, Kirill." Vitalina didn't look at her husband. She glared at her mother-in-law. "Explain to your mother that this isn't a dorm, son," Lydia Markovna howled, pressing her hands to her immense chest. "She's driving us out into the street. The grandchildren, the nephews. Svetka, your own sister, the one your husband beat. Sveta immediately jumped into action, shedding a tear. "Kirill, I really have nowhere to go." He changed the locks. Kirill cringed. He placed the cake on the shoe rack right on Vitalina's leather glove, and looked guiltily at his wife. "Look, come on, lately. Let's live for a couple of days until Sveta and I find an apartment. Not on the street, of course." Vitalina saw right through this man. A couple of days would turn into weeks. The apartment search would drag on for years. Kirill was soft as wax. You could mold him into anything, but it was usually the woman who screamed the loudest who did the molding. Now it was his mother who was louder. "I won't clear out the workshop, Vitalina," snapped Ipit. "If you want to stay, sleep on the living room floor. But only for 3 days, and I didn't hire myself out to feed anyone." She turned and went into the bedroom, closing the door tightly. The lock clicked. A hubbub of voices immediately erupted behind the wall. Her mother-in-law's indignant bass voice, Sveta's whining, and Kirill's self-justifying mumble. Vitalina sat on the edge of the bed. Her hands were shaking. She had worked as a furniture restorer for 6 years. She knew how to strip away layers of old paint, clean out rot, and restore the structure. She knew that if the rot was deep, it couldn't be covered over, it had to be cut out. Life had turned into hell within 24 hours. In the morning, Vitalina discovered the bathroom was jammed. Children's tights were hanging everywhere. On her shelf with expensive cosmetics sat someone's razor covered in hair and an open tube of cheap toothpaste that smelled like chalk. That smelled like chalk. The kitchen was worse. Lydia Markovna had taken over the stove. "I made some cabbage," she announced when Vitalina came in to make coffee. "I only took your saucepan, that shiny one, and I had to scrub the frying pan with a Sido sponge, or everything would burn. Your coating is crap." Vitalina slowly turned her gaze to the stove. Her favorite stone-coated frying pan, which couldn't be touched with anything hard than silicone, stood in the sink, scratched down to the aluminum flesh. "You ruined the dishes, Vitalina." "Oh, don't make things up." The mother-in-law waved her off. "It's a normal frying pan. It's clean now. Better tell me where you keep the cereal. The kids need porridge." Vitalina silently opened the cupboard, took out a can of coffee, and poured the beans into the machine. "The cereal's at the store. Kirill left. Go and have a look at it." Lydia Markovna turned to face Sveta, who was sitting at the table, lazily picking at a cheese sandwich. "Kirill toils away at work, and this queen can't even buy for her family. Kirill's salary is 45,000. Vitalina remarked coldly, waiting for the coffee machine to finish humming. "And I have an urgent order that feeds this whole family. And I pay Kirill car debt too." "Go ahead, reproach your husband," her mother-in-law screeched. "A wife should be a support system, not an accountant." Valentina took a cup and went into the workshop. There, amid the smell of turpentine and wood dust, she could breathe. At midday, they started pounding on the workshop door. "Aunt Vita," Pashka yelled, "give me the tablet. We're bored." Vitalina put on her headphones. She was sanding the leg of an Art Nouveau chair, removing the darkened varnish millimeter by millimeter. The sound of the sandur drowned out the screams, but the vibrations on the floor indicated that the children were running wild in the living room. Kirill returned that evening. He looked even more exhausted. "We can come out and have a family meal," he asked, poking his head through the crack in the workshop door. "No," Vitalina said, not looking up from her work. "I have deadlines. And by the way, your mother killed my 5,000 ruble frying pan. Will you buy a new one?" "Yeah, I'll buy one, I will." Kirill nodded. "Listen, Sveta asked the little one has allergies, and he needs a humidifier in his room. Laka. We have a powerful one. It's in the bedroom, and it works for us. But they're kids after all." Kirill made puppy eyes. "Look, don't be a fool, just a couple of days." Eventually, the humidifier migrated to the living room. Vitalina felt her space shrinking like chagrin. On the third day, the inevitable happened. Vitalina left for a meeting with a client. She returned earlier than planned. The client rescheduled. As she entered the apartment, she heard a strange sound, a grinding sound, and her heart sank. She dropped her bag and ran to the workshop. The door was ajar. In the middle of the room, sitting astride an antique chest of drawers, was Pashka. He held a screwdriver in his hands. He was enthusiastically picking at the mother-of-pearl inlay. Sveta stood nearby, talking on the phone. "Yes, some old junk stinks here." "Oh!" She saw Vitalina. Vitalina didn't scream. She flew to the chest of drawers, grabbed Pashka by the collar and pulled him off the furniture. A deep scratch gaped in the polished mahogany surface. The mother-of-pearl leaf was torn out. "What have you done?" Vitalina whispered. Her voice faded. Sveta clutched the phone to her chest in fear. "Why are you grabbing the kid? He was just playing." "So what, a scratch on an old nightstand? You'll just cover it up." "That nightstand cost 200,000. Vitalina felt her eyes darken. This was a museum piece. Lydia Markovna appeared in the doorway. "What are you yelling about?" "The kid loves educational games. So what, you're just a block of wood. Tell me why you didn't make the soup." We waited and waited. Vitalina looked at them, at Sveta's dull expression, at her mother, insolent grin, at the ruined masterpiece. A heavy mechanism turned inside, locking the airlocks. "Out," she said. "What?" Lydia Markovna didn't understand. "Get out of here, everyone." "You have." "No, right now, no." The mother-in-law flared up. "I'll call Kirill now." "Call." Vitalina took out her phone and dialed a number. Not Kirill's. "Hello, Arkady." "Yes, it's Vitalina. I need movers. Now." "And a lawyer." "Yes, the one for the division of property." She turned to her relatives, but her face was pale but absolutely calm. "You will pay for the restoration. Sveta, I will sue you for damage someone else's property. Experts will assess the damage." "You are sick." Sveta backed away. "Mom, she's crazy." "She won't do anything," Lydia Markovna stated confidently, although fear flashed in her eyes. "This is my son's apartment. I invested in this house." Vitalina grinned. She was waiting for this argument. "We will talk in the evening," she said. "In the meantime, get out of my workshop. If anyone comes to that door again, I'll call the police and file a burglary charge." The rest of the day passed in tense silence. The relatives barricaded themselves in the kitchen. Vitalina sat in the workshop, assessing the damage. The scratch was deep but repairable. They'd have to strip the entire layer of varnish and put in an insert. A week's work. But the issue wasn't the dresser, it was the principle. That evening, Kirill came home with a bouquet of wilted roses. He'd sensed the tension even in the entryway. "Vidi, Mom called and said you yelled at Pashka." "Sit." Vitalina pointed to a chair in the center of the living room. Behind Kirill, the support group loomed Lydia Markovna, with a ladle as if she were holding a cypress, and Sveta, her eyes red, as red. "We need to have a serious talk," his mother-in-law began, beating Vitalina to it. She decided to go on the attack. "Your wife Kirill has crossed all boundaries. She terrorizes the children. She doesn't cook. She threatens legal action, and this is in your house." Kirill shifted from foot to foot. "Look, why go to court? We're your people. Your mother claims she has rights to this apartment." Vitalina took out a folder with documents. "Let's sort this out." "Of course I do." Lydia Markovna slammed a ladle on the table. "Kirill, do you remember when you took out a mortgage? How much money did I give you?" 70,000. For me, pensioners are a huge amount of money. Vitalina looked closely at her husband. Kirill turned pale. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. He began to look away, trying to signal to his mother, but she was hostile. I paid off your mortgage with my own money, so my daughter and the children will also live here. And you are obligated to cook for Vanda Amupa, the mother-in-law declared, placing her hands on her hips and looking triumphantly at her daughter-in-law. Silence fell over the room. Vita stopped sobbing, awaiting the capitulation of the insolent restorer. Kirill remained silent. He looked at of his shoes as if salvation was written there. You mean those 70,000 rubles with which Kirill bought himself a gaming console? Vitlina clarified to her mother-in-law, and then said directly into her wide eyes, I even kept the receipt. Lydia Markovna froze. She slowly turned her head toward her son. What console? I told you, take it to the bank for early repayment. Mom, come on, Kirill croaked. His voice broke into a falsetto. There was a promotion there. I thought I'd throw it in with a bonus later. And then I had to fix the car. You wasted your mother's money on toys, Lydia. Markovna The blow was dealt not by Vitalina, but by reality. Her sacrifice, her great contribution, which she boasted about to the neighbors. I bought an apartment for my son. It turned into a plastic box under a TV. And by the way, Vitalina continued mercilessly, we paid off the mortgage 6 months ago with my bonus for restoring the furniture from the Sheremet estate. 2.5 million. Not a penny of your money is within the walls of this apartment. But Kirill's debt to me is growing. She threw a sheet of paper with printouts the table. Half of the utilities for 3 years, groceries, gas, and now 20,000 for restoring the chest of drawers that your grandson ruined. Sveta Aktula. I don't have that kind of money. Then be thankful I'm not calling Child Protection Services for letting your children live in the unsanitary conditions you've created here and without proper supervision. Vitalina bluffed about Child Protection Services, but the word worked like a whip. So that's it. Vitalina stood up. She turned out to be taller than me. You have an hour to get your spirit out of here. Kirill, you can get ready to... Vid, what's wrong with you? Kirill jerked towards her. What does this have to do with me? I'm her husband. You're not her husband. Vitalina looked at him with disgust like a piece of wood eaten away by a woodworm. He can't be saved, only burned. You allowed your mother to humiliate me in my house. You lied about the money. You brought a gang without asking me. And I watched them ruin my work. She went to the door and threw it open. Nastish. An hour. Then I'll change the locks. The movers are on their way. They'll help you carry out your bags. We're not going anywhere. Lydia Markovna drove in, but the enthusiasm had dried up. She looked at her son, who had pressed himself into the corner, and understood. There will be no protection. You'll go, Vitalina said calmly, or I'm calling the police. I have an outsider here who is damaging property. You don't have a residence permit. The packing was chaotic. Sveta sobbed, stuffing the children's things into bags. Lydia Markovna cursed her daughter-in-law to the 7th generation, calling her a witch and a money grubber. Kirill tried to make peace, grabbing Vitala's hands, but she shook off his touch like dust. I'll file for divorce tomorrow, she told him at the door. The division of property will be fair. The apartment was bought during the marriage. They'll split it in half, fine. But I'll prove in court the origin of the down payment funds. It was money from the sale of my premarital home. And all the payments were made from my card. You'll receive compensation for your investment. Just enough to rent a one-room apartment for my mom and sister. And take your console. It's the same one, after all, for 70,000. Kirill Panuro trudged to the elevator, dragging his sister's suitcase behind him. In one hand, he clutched to his chest the very console that had ruined the myth of his mother-in-law's great help. When the door slammed behind them, Vitalina leaned her forehead against the cold metal. Silence. Blessed silence. She walked into the kitchen. Dirty dishes piled up in the sink. There were crumbs on the floor. A ruined frying pan. The scratches glistened forlornly. Vitalina picked up a large trash bag. In one motion, she swept someone else's sponge, her mother-in-law's cheap tea, and a forgotten child's toy into it. Then she opened the window. The cool evening air rushed into the apartment, blowing away the smell of fried capelin and cheap perfume. Vitalina poured herself a glass of wine, went to the dresser in the workshop, and ran her finger over the scratch. Nothing, she thought. Woody is patient. Everything can be fixed if the rot is removed. She was alone. He had a mortgage, a difficult job, and damage. But she had her home, and now. Well, dear listeners, Vitalina chose respect for herself and her work. It seems that this is the only right decision in such a situation. Thank you for watching, and may your home always be peaceful.